Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Derek Cicero, Vice President of Products and Strategy here at Luxion, the makers of KeyShot. As you probably know, KeyShot 10 was recently released. KeyShot 10.1 was released this Monday. So if you've not already done so, feel free to read up on what's latest and greatest in KeyShot 10 and 10.1. You can also get a free trial of 10.1 from our website. Just go to the main page and hit try. And so, yeah, you can also kind of follow along after this webinar and some of the cool things that you've seen. But very happy today to have the team at Sprout Studios and Sprout Visualization presenting for us today. Sprout is a Boston-based studio that uses a lot of KeyShot in some amazing visuals, which you'll see today, as well as Solidworks. So thought it would be a good time to bring them on. They are run by Jordan Nolman, CEO and principal. And today we have Jack O'Farrell will be presenting for us. Big thank you to the folks at NVIDIA who have sent an A6000 card, one of their latest and greatest cards. If you don't know already, KeyShot, as of KeyShot 9, runs both CPU and GPU with one click. And Jackson will show off some of the power that's in the A6000. So a big thank you to NVIDIA for that. So with no further ado, I will bring it over to Jack to show us how Sprout makes the most out of KeyShot and SolidWorks. Take it away, Jack.
Hey, nice to meet everybody. I'm just going to give you guys a quick introduction to our CEO and founder, Jordan Nolman, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about Sprite Studios and a little bit about Sprite Biz. Enjoy.
Hi there, SolidWorks World and KeyShot. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Jordan Nolman, the CEO and Executive Creative Director at Sprite Studios, headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. So unfortunately today I'm not going to be able to join the live stream, but bear with me. This is my first time doing one of these pre-recordings. So I figured I'd just start by telling you guys a little bit about Sprout. We're a design consultancy that specializes in design strategy, industrial design, graphic design, UI, UX, and then product visualization, which we're going to talk a bunch about today. My background is in product design and branding. I graduated from RIT with a BFA in industrial design. These days, I'm primarily running the business side of Sprout. But that said, I've always been super into the rendering and the visualization side as well. I can still remember the first day that I met Jeff Hayden from KeyShot. I was working back at Astro Studios in San Francisco at the time. And this like non-ID software sales dude rolls up and like literally blew our minds. We were just blown away with how simple and easy and fast it was to use. Just created some killer imagery compared to what we've been using previously. So fast forward, well over a decade, and today we're crushing, KeyShot renders, animations on the daily here at Sprout, and like, just been really awesome to kind of build out, render farm. We've got some just awesome render rigs that the guys have built as well, that are just crushing kind of CAD and renders all the time. In a bit, Jack O'Farrell, who leads our Sprout Biz, is going to kind of tell you a lot more about that and kind of what we've been up to. But for now, I thought maybe it'd be cool for you guys to check out some of Sprout's work in our demo reel. I hope you guys enjoy. now I'm going to hand things over to Jack O'Farrell, who leads Sprite Bits for us. Jack's going to take you guys on a behind-the-scenes tour of some work that we've been doing for Staples lately. He's going to show you kind of what our process is and going from SolidWorks into KeyShot, and then kind of best practices to ensure consistent brand language with every render. Thanks so much for having us. Be well and stay safe.
Awesome. So that was our leader and founder, Jordan Allman. Kind of brought you through a little bit about what we do. Jordan, I know you're on. If there's anything else you want to follow up with.
Oh, all good. Sorry, I got to mute it. But thanks a lot, guys. I actually just landed. But yeah, I'll let you take it over, Jack.
Awesome. So today, guys, I'm going to bring you through kind of what Jordan just fell off there with the marketing-led manufacturing, the new currency. So what we found ourselves in the sphere of is creating content alongside the manufacturing phase. So today we're going to go, Jordan's already gone through Sprite Studio, so I'm not going to go through too much of that, but I'm going to go through Sprite Biz, then a little bit about me, then how we work with big brands, particularly with Staples, and go through a little bit of an A to Z on the on-package graphics through a workflow demo, and then we'll finish up then, I think, with a Q&A. So without further ado, a little bit about myself. I'm an Irish industrial designer based in LA at the moment, working remotely for Sprite. I've been working for Sprite now for a few years. Throughout the years, I've kind of worked between medical devices, consumer electronics, service design. A lot of this has kind of brought us into this whole creative design agency in a way with what we're doing here at Sprite Biz. Creating assets for the likes of Draper, K&N, Comcan, and some more leading brands that are looking to kind of revolutionize their inventory images, but also create some hyper-realistic social media content too. Here you'll see SolidWorks and KeyShot. Specifically why we use SolidWorks and KeyShot, which you'll see today, is just due to the efficiency that we've built a workflow around both the user interface, the ability to speed up our workflow through optimization, particularly in KeyShot. We're starting to lean in a little bit more into Python scripting. With SolidWorks, we're able to, everybody on our floor is able to use SolidWorks. Everybody's been proficient in SolidWorks since they left college. And it's a great transition we have between those two software programs. And practice rarely makes perfect. And I want to kind of emphasize on this because every update that KeyShot do, there's always a new great feature. And it's something that's one of the biggest reasons we use it is because they're always trying to evolutionize and actually answer a lot of the questions that both we as a user have and even on their own forum that a lot of people are pushing. And you can see here, this is a great model that we were able to get online. And you can see the heavy detail that's going in here. I think detail is really integral when it comes to these models of creating that hyper-realistic effect, but also being able to add on the likeness through these materials. And I'll go through a little bit of that now, kind of digging on those three pillars of what we feel is integral to make a great image. Number one out of these three pillars is composition and lighting. And this is kind of at the core. Obviously, we're trying to retain the customer's attention along the way as possible. And carry this in a densely populated market is very difficult nowadays. When everybody's starting to strive to make these new images to become really eye-catching, it really needs and requires an emotional response. And that's something that we at Sprite Biz are trying to really carefully handcraft. It also obviously requires a great model. And this kind of delves back into the SolidWorks ability. So we're always, all of our vendors are using SolidWorks. We use SolidWorks. We kind of use this tool throughout, and it's quite universal at this stage. I think it's fundamental when it comes to learning any solid modeling. So the fact that KeyShot have been able to kind of emphasize on that, especially, I don't know if you guys have seen it out there, but the new KeyShot 10.1 update has a great seamless integration with SolidWorks 2021, and that's something that we're going to start, incorporating a lot more into our workflows. Just that seamless integration from one platform to another. And execution, and this kind of leads me on to who we're kind of powered by today, which is NVIDIA. The execution is going to be huge because the expectation in reality, this is kind of met in that framework of what you're working with, what your rig is. We built an optimized workflow around 2060 RTX 2060 GPU, and then NVIDIA were actually really were very generous enough to give us a loan of the RTX A6000, which, you know, I said to the guys earlier on, it's kind of like running in sandals and running in sneakers. Like once you run in sneakers, you're not going to go back. It's uncomparable. And you can see here on the top right hand side there, for some of you guys who are looking to upgrade your GPU cards, this is a fairly dense populated scene with a lot of caustics, depth of field in here, and it's still smashed out 901 samples in 1 minute. You know, not to mention the fact that I think it's 48 gigs of VRAM. So it kind of, not only this, but I can move around my scene a lot easier, and it's able to not freeze, not glitch, just a really seamless integration. So big shout out to NVIDIA, really appreciate it. And I really hope you guys enjoy kind of the rest of what we're about to go through today. So a little bit about our process. So starting with asset evaluation, this is going to be our phase one. So we're going to, these 4 phases are usually what we discuss with a lot of our clients on a baseline. And what we'll go through is each of these phases in depth and really show you the nitty gritty of being able to get from a tech back to a full rendered model. But for now, I'll give you kind of the breakdown as a vague assembly. So asset evaluation, looking at these CAD files. Do they need to be rebuilt? Do they need to be edited? Do we need to create them from scratch? Looking then, you know, studio setup, phase 2. So once the CAD models are reviewed and approved, then we'll start looking at developing that lighting and layout that we talked about earlier on, that composition, which is going to be huge. And it's kind of is the baseline when it moves forward into the later stages. Then material refinement. So looking into that phase 3. So looking at the physical references that we have and being, how do we build upon these? How do we recreate them in KeyShot? Do we build our own bump maps, texture maps? How are we, you know, getting this as close to as possible? And then rendering approval, or in this phase 4. So after the subsequent rounds of revisions, which we'll kind of discuss in a minute, you'll look at, you know, how do we bring this to a high fidelity image? How do we add these perfect shadows? Do we layer on our images? You know, and a lot of the time we'll kind of render out a couple of the same image with emphasis on different materials so that we can composite them in Photoshop to get the best image possible. So with a quick emphasis, what we'll look at is our biggest, one of our biggest clients to date, which is going to be Staples. And as you can see here, over the last couple of years, particularly, we've helped them grow 5 of their sub brands, which we'll go through in a second, combined over 5,000 renders, reverse engineered hundreds of Staples products, you know, created over hundreds of innovative packaging and boxing solutions. And now even currently, we're still, you know, ripping through over 500 renders a week and more. And some of these brands talk about are True Red, creating some of these on-package graphics, but also some of their online inventory images as well. NXT, which is their technology side, which we're also creating some of those assets from the ground up. Union and Scale, a lot of this was reverse engineering. So taking products which may or may not have a full set of CAD mods ready for it. A lot of these can be mixed matched from different previous models without having an updated one. So a lot of the time we'll come in and we'll rebuild these models for them so that they have them not only for on-package graphics, but for, you know, full room render layouts, or specifically internal trend reviews if they're trying to see, you know, what it will look like in a different color, if they need to change it up, and do focus group testing on some of the best combinations that they can produce. Perc, which is a kind of a traditional break room essentials. So you can see here, we had a lot of fun with these ones, creating some of the visual renders around more of a playful theme, more of a witty play to a lot of these things, but also trying to make sure that we get those colors just right. So see here on the bottom left, you can see these two almost like similar solo cups, but the one on the left-hand side is a PET solo cup, but the one on the right is actually a composable polymer. So you can see that slight change in tone. I know it might almost be hard to see, but it's still visible there, and bringing in those smaller details to make sure that it really does drive home not only the feel of the product, but the real true nature of what those materials look like. And then looking into Coastwide, which is around professional grade facility supplies. And you're kind of thinking, you know, like, how do we make a hand sanitizer? You know, how do we add all that functionality into one image? And you can see there in the bottom left, we're trying to show both the pod, the how it actually works, the mechanisms inside, and how easy it is to just kind of pull those down with those pinholes, trying to incorporate a lot into these images whilst also making them kind of refined a little bit more so that it's appealing when you're kind of scanning through a densely populated marketplace. And then kind of, so to bring a couple of those into focus, what we're going to look at is the NXT power surges as a whole through this whole workflow. So I spoke about there being 4 phases at the beginning of this presentation, and then those 4 phases essentially break down into that list there you'll find on the left-hand side. So instead of coming to a client and showing them this grandiose list, the 4 phases really simplifies this down. But kind of to reiterate back onto that as well, is the reason why we find a lot of clients moving this way, and you can see it here, is that transporting products and staff costs a lot of money. That's just the bottom line, and a lot of this can be a logistical nightmare, both for the shipping fees alone, when you're sending heavy, bulky items, but also the volume, the seismic difference that can occur with those too. So we've seen a lot of people trying to move towards preventing a lot of this. A lot of the prototypes that get shipped could be anywhere in the region of 5,000 to 10,000 for one piece itself. So a lot of people are starting to move towards reducing those costs and investing them into an asset that they can always manipulate and have for the longevity of that product's lifespan. So as the first step in this, a lot of the time we'll get a tech pack, and this tech pack will be comprised of both the Pantone colors, the textures, the materials, the LED lighting, a lot of the labeling that goes on there, so that we can pull all these straight out of the tech packs themselves. We can break them down. Up here on the right hand side, you can see this grounded, protected 3.4 amp. These things that we'll pull off and use for labels, so that we're not stressing getting any textures wrong, getting any labels wrong. We can take these as a one-to-one and apply them accurately. CAD development, so you'll see a lot of the time we'll use Solidworks, like I said, just simply because this is the most universal program that we'll use across not only ourselves, our vendors, our clients. Everybody has access to Solidworks. So we have this great tool that we can always go in, we can edit, we can overlay, we can share with our clients, they can edit it, they can send it back. We know that there's never going to be any problem or any issues with opening it or editing it. And a lot of the times we may get like a step file from a client like this where it's already missing these off-the-shelf parts. So there might be missing some of the foot or some of the feet, maybe some of the screws, some of these smaller details that really bring it all in together. But the fact that they're missing means that we'll go in, we'll check the CAD, we'll make sure, we'll take a note of what needs to be done to improve this model. Then we'll look at the initial composition. So this is kind of how we'll lay it out for the client. We'll start off firstly by setting out all of our products, making sure that everything's labeled, make sure everything's kind of in there, set and tidy with our studio sets and our model sets. We want to make sure that when we're going forward, and I kind of have it noted up here on the top right, that when a project kicks off, we may have a couple of people come on and come off the project. And we also might be sending it to the client if they are, KeyShot savvy, that they feel like they want to alter some things themselves. So what we'll do is we'll set up a file so that it's almost universal for any KeyShot user to use, so that they can use this post the finish line, so that they can go in and always look back on files and be able to navigate them with ease. And that's something that we try to instill from day one. Then looking at the FPO, so this is called, for placement only. This is a term that we use strictly when it comes to printing. So this is something that we just want to reiterate to the client and to the vendor or to anybody seeing it, that these images are specifically just for layouts. These will go typically onto the die line so that they can work the text around it, and they can start, working that back end of things, the legal text and copy, where things go on that side of the product. And then oftentimes we'll get CAD and render adjustments throughout the project. This is obviously not uncommon for a lot of Chinese manufacturers, potentially to change the mold on something or to need to change due to internal requirements. So here you'll see on the top left, this is what we started off with. This was one of the main heads, and it's still used throughout a lot of them. But for some of the other products, that actually required more of an oval, thinner head. So we will send these to the client. The client may ask us as well to be able to demonstrate what that visually looks like. And we either will CAD build it, like you see on the top right-hand side, or we'll bring it into KeyShot there, which you can see a visual comparison side by side, which often makes it a little bit easier to visualize. And same again, like I said, again, it's just so easy just to drop these in and start creating and start changing things up and really getting to look at them instead of just looking at, sketches on paper. And then about midway through, when we're starting to get towards these finer details, we'll likely do a live edit with the client. And what that means is we'll essentially do exactly what we're doing today, where I'll be kind of demonstrating through the workflow and the process to go through kind of the materials, the breakdown, make sure that we're fine tuning a lot of the stuff, particularly with these LEDs. You'll see here that there's a specific emphasis on these. And what I'm trying to do is make sure that we align it correctly with the client's needs. Like I said, again, at the beginning of this, these are marketing assets. So albeit it may look a little bit more vibrant than the actual LED, we want to be able to convey, as good as it gets. We want to be able to make this look as pretty as it is. We want to show off all the features. And you'll see that now in a little bit of time, where the chamfers will be accentuated a little bit more than the reality that light will allow it to. And just so that the client sees that first off the package glance, that they can see all the features of the product in one shot. And here then we'll bring that closer to putting it onto the packaging die line. So as I spoke earlier on, these now would be one step further than FPO. So these are to be used in that, in that same system of it'll go on, it'll be checked, it'll be adjusted. But particularly from this stage, which is really pivotally important, and kind of nearly at every stage that we come to a review or a feedback situation, we'll look at doing test prints. So what we'll do is we'll do these test prints. And the reason for this, and you can kind of see here, is there may be different vendors involved. We may get different prints from different places. And we want to make sure that there's consistency across the board. And if there isn't, this is our opportunity to be able to go in, find out what that problem is, adjust our renders or adjust our CAD, and kind of play it back and see where these issues lie before it gets to a later phase. So what we'll do here is we'll do a little file prep then for the vendor to make sure that we can eradicate any of these issues moving forward. So I know this is a little bit grainy, but I'll be able to pull it up afterwards, thankfully. That we'll break these down into all the subsequent layers, whether that's our shadow layer, our reflective layer, our temporary backgrounds, a substitute LED. Maybe we pull an LED from one product and we compose it on top of another, or superimpose it on top of another product. We can do all these things in Photoshop once we've created enough of the assets from KeyShot. And thankfully, with the ability to be able to save out some of those layers in KeyShot, we're saving ourselves a lot more time in Photoshop having to do it ourselves. And that really is very pivotally important in a lot of this pre-print production, specifically around clipping paths, which are down here, which I'll show you guys after, I'm sure, which kind of kind of turns into something like this. So what we'll do within that file prep is use those clipping paths to be able to make sure that we can get the exact shape that we want for this on product. And be able to then use the shadow underneath it as a multiply layer so that we can make sure that we can kind of glue these together, make a sandwich of a really nice image that's not going to give us any hassle or any issues during printing. And then what we'll do then with those files prior to handing them off is we'll do our own check file prior to send off. So we'll go in, we'll check to make sure that there's no issues, that the gradient isn't failing, that all our colors are in line. And oftentimes when we do something like this where it's black on black, we found earlier on in that issue with the FPO that our image, the CMYK on the image was acting quite wild with the Pantone on the back. So we actually changed our image to a grayscale using the same Pantone. So that way we could make sure that we didn't have any of those issues that we saw previously and that we could get a better final image with the final print. And then what we'll do, and this is a different part of the NXT realm, but what we'll do is we'll lay out these packages, both print and on screen, so both digital and physical, and we'll make sure that the gradients are the same across all packages. Alignment is all there, so that we can make sure that we hit that standard to make sure that nothing falls short. So here you can see the gradient on each of these packages is all the same, all in the same placement. The product is all aligned properly. The NXT is where it's supposed to be. Everything is kind of sized accurately and how it should be on the final print so that we don't have different packages standing out. And then kind of the last stage is just getting it on the shelf. As you can see here, there's uniformity between a lot of these products, the layouts, the cutaways, the plug layouts, we try to ensure that these standards are always upheld. And a big part of that is evaluation. So we do that with a lot of our clients. Is we'll come to the end of a project and we'll evaluate, where the stressors were. If it's the first project that we're doing for a client, we'll figure out how we can create this visual brand language, which Jordan kind of touched on at the beginning, about making sure that the shadows are the exact same gradient. If they've got noise in them, that the percentage of the noise is the exact same, that the lighting is coming from the right area, and be able to ensure that once we set up that document, that similar again, if someone jumps onto the project or we have someone from outside looking in on the files, that they'll be able to recreate these files to the exact same degree. And to kind of touch on that and kind of to finish out the workflow is kind of just showing that the possibilities are endless, and the potential is limitless. So a lot of these assets that you just saw a minute ago were created for on-package graphics, but oftentimes when you dial in a lot of these details like the LEDs or your materials, you're going to be able to find that these products now have been created for a life longer than that, for a life through social media, through social campaigns and on online inventories as well. So these are just kind of a couple of examples I'm going to run through, which are some of the product renderings that we've done for clients in the past. We're constantly going through new clients, and I wish I could show you some of the stuff that we're doing now, especially with the RTX A6000. I feel like it would, it would blow your mind. But these are some of the ones that we've been able to really truly optimize through our workflow, particularly, but also creating online assets both for CES shows, for crowdfunding campaigns, and for full-fledged huge corporations like the likes of Maxim or Staples. We do a lot of branding and packaging work, so a lot of times it's hard to visualize what that's going to look like, and we'll use a lot of our graphics team from Sprite Studios, but then the client will also want to start seeing these early on, so we'll start bringing in Sprite Bits very early in the process to be able to visualize what those changes look like. It's a lot, it's very well and good seeing these on paper or seeing them kind of printed out, but being able to visualize what it looks like maybe on a new product can really change up the game. We do a lot of product animations, a lot of teaser videos, whether this is internal for quarterly reviews or whether it's on a grand scale like CES. A lot of the times this will be kind of this beautiful add-on where they'll recognize that these assets have been created, and they're hiding all this beautiful tech in behind it that they really want to showcase, and then we'll end up working with the client to creatively show how this transforms. In context images, a huge part of this can be, as you can see here in the top left, there may be products, especially medical devices, that can be very, very difficult to photograph in those environments. So we'll be asked by a lot of clients to be able to use some images that they have from those labs themselves without these prototypes going in, and we'll be able to superimpose them and work with the client to be able to get everything right when it comes down to those products. Technical illustrations, kind of like as I discussed, looking at how do these break down, whether it's filter material, whether it's moisture wicking, whether it's a turbine fan, whatever the case is, being able to hone in and really emphasize it. And something I discussed earlier on was how do you stand out in the crowd and really evoke an emotional response? And I think, as you can see here in the bottom left, I think that does exactly that. It shows that performance level of this turbine, and really instills that confidence in the product. Additionally, looking at a lot of the features that we have that we utilize from KeyShot, particularly, is this 360 interactive product views, and you'll see that coming up a lot more in the likes of Amazon and a ton of marketplaces at the moment are using these 360 views to give that buyer that same confidence, especially now during COVID, not being able to get into store and turn these products around and be able to lift them up. This has been hugely incremental with the success of a lot of e-commerce sites, particularly in the last year. Same goes for exploded informative views. These are kind of, if you've got something to really wow and show off, why not do it? We did a lot of assets for K&N for, I believe it was SEMA last year, to show off a lot of these filtering, their own patented filtering layout systems. So you could be sure that they're excited to kind of show that product off and really give it its full wow that it deserves. And of course, breaking down material configurations. This is something that we find ourselves being we're no means novices in this area. We got a lot of practice in with a lot of our clients who come with one-off prototypes that they want to replicate those same materials. So we'll do a lot of one-off materials for our clients. And then looking into custom HDRI lightings, we'll often go out and take our 360 view cameras and go out and take these images for our backgrounds and be able to apply them. If there's specific lighting that we want, if there's specific backgrounds that we need, we'll either try and create them through physical geometry in KeyShot, or we'll use those lighting environments to replicate that ourselves. And then another thing that we find ourselves getting into, the more we start releasing all of these assets, the more we find ourselves doing training and master classes. One thing that we've tried to do is be able to build these down into a more simple format, so that once we leave a client with these files, that they're able to have the access to be able to make those small edits or be able to play with those LED lightings as time unfolds. Something that kind of breaks down time. It allows the conversation to flow a little bit easier. That is all from me. I tried to leave it open so that we could have as much conversation, I think, as possible. But I'd like to give a huge thanks, first of all, to KeyShot, the guys at Solidworks, the guys at NVIDIA, and of course the guys at Staples as well. Great team to work with, and very proud to show our work with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. Yeah, can you bring up a couple of models maybe and just sort of show us how that GPU rendering works as we jump into the questions? And then, so we have a couple of different questions. I'll kind of run through here for the folks that have kind of asked some things. One question was, do you kind of differentiate the rendering quality based on the process? So when you're doing sort of design development versus kind of final marketing images, sort of how do you sort of manage or target sort of the rendering quality based on phase?
So based on phase, we will do a one pass. So we kind of set our standard as always trying to have our final images be 4K, just because it keeps it consistent across the board. If they want to come back and use the assets for social, or they want to use it even, online advertising on larger screens like desktops, we try to keep it so that they can always come back and use it for different applications. But when it comes to early stage 1080p, we try to make sure that the more important aspects are knocked out there, which is composition, lighting, and layouts. Outside of that, if we're doing 4K for those, now with the RTX A6000, we could probably just crank them out at 4K anyway. But we built our optimized workflow for the fact that there could be, take a stapler, for example, which might have 5 different models with 3 different colorways, and then maybe another 5 different views per stapler. That kind of, really quickly, the amount of images that we need to produce racks up very quickly. So we'll try to keep them around 1080p to make sure that we get what we need out of each feedback round. The first one might be composition. Second one, maybe we'll do lighting to make sure the shadows are aligned. And then we'll start bringing in those materials. And once we get to materials, then we'll start stepping it up to the 4K realm again to make sure that we're looking at what would be the final product.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you want to show us real quick kind of how that GPU mode kind of works?
Yeah, it's as simple as flicking a switch, honestly. So I have an AMD Threadripper of 64 cores, and you can see it's kind of doing its best here to dial it in. It's getting kind of less than 3 frames per second. You can see here in this top left-hand corner, which could be fine if you're just trying to kind of sit there and watch it and wait. But then the fact that GPU is really being optimized to kind of take all the juice that the A6000 can give it, as soon as I press this button, you can see that it's already miles above within the space of 10 seconds.
Great. Yeah. And just so for folks that know, I mean, everything with the exception of cutaway from a material standpoint works the same in GPU or CPU. So if you're kind of working on a file and one person has a GPU and one person has a CPU, you can kind of, the file itself won't be have to be sort of customized for one or the other. It'll just work. And so have you, are people at Sprout using a lot of GPU now? Have you guys started to move over towards GPU rendering?
Yeah, as bad as it sounds, I don't think we use CPU. We try to avert from it, just because a lot of the time what we'll have up is SolidWorks and KeyShot. So we'll have our CPU kind of already being cranked out on one end, and we try to make sure that we can at least in some way separate those two bodies so that we can always optimize our KeyShot and always optimize our computer's workflow itself throughout any other tasks that we needed to do.
Great. One person had a question about UV unwrapping. Do you guys, when you're doing some of this stuff, obviously, you'll have to do UV unwrapping. Do you do that in KeyShot, which now has a UV unwrapping tool, or what's your sort of workflow around that?
We tend to have our own maps that we'll build out, and if it's a new product, we don't spend too much time doing UV unwrapping, particularly in KeyShot. If we need it, we sometimes use some procedural stuff in Blender and output those maps and apply them in KeyShot, just because that's our steady workflow. I know KeyShot has a easier use interface, but we found that we're just able to use those maps and apply. I guess that's just our workflow at the moment. That's the way we've optimized it anyway.
Great. And so one person's asking, when you kind of get those in context images, which are so great, right, and kind of really make the product kind of pop, how do you get the images? How do you put that together? Do you kind of build that from layers onto a photograph, or do you actually kind of build out different levels of sort of 3D geometry? What's sort of your process there?
Yeah, great question. Thankfully, KeyShot already has the answer. We use a lot of front plates and back plates. So we'll use this front plate tool here, which you'll see in the image bar. And what we can do here is we can have our PNG and we'll put this in as a front plate if we need to, if there's going to be a depth in it, if there's going to be something in the foreground or something in the background and our product's going to sit somewhere in between the two. We'll be able to use that, apply that front plate, be able to measure it up, make sure the size is all there, and then even have our background image that we're going to use in there as well. And that way we can composite and superimpose those three images together. Even more, sometimes we'll find ourselves sometimes having maybe 10 layers, depending on what the product is. Once you start playing with the product in a larger space, we'll start emphasizing different parts of that product. So we may just start layering this product's features up together. So essentially, I don't know if the person who's asked this question is familiar with that kind of exploded window tool configuration thing in Windows, where it like kind of buffs out all the windows you have up. But it's essentially like that, and then concording them all together to create one flattened image.
Okay, great. And then I'll put you on the spot here. If you can click on the cloud library button in the lower left-hand corner, I'm not sure if you use that or even if you're logged in there on that one, but there is now models within KeyShot 10. So you actually do have the ability to kind of pull down models for scene dressing. So that's kind of a great way sometimes just to kind of put things together from a look dev standpoint.
Oh yeah, for sure. We have a good familiarity. We definitely like to use this tool, and even in a lot of cases, especially in our office where we have our linked server set up, we actually take our items, specifically any items that we use frequently, and actually upload it into our models, and we'll have this linked to our server file. And we found that to be a really useful way of building out scenes super quickly with assets that we even have built internally.
Awesome. So one question people are kind of asking, how do you handle getting multiple CAD files or multiple SolidWorks files from a customer where, you'll get one and you'll work with it and then there'll be some updates or some changes. And then kind of what's your sort of process for incorporating that as you go? It
really boils down to hitting certain checkpoints to make sure that we get all CAD. If there's going to be CAD edits or there's going to be unforeseen circumstances, then that's out of our control. We can't set a deadline as to when we're going to update all the CAD and geometry, but we'll try and figure out if there's going to be any shortcomings like that and try to hit certain timelines of being like, if there's ambiguity between a certain model or there's ambiguity between a certain part that's going to be used, we'll try and wait until that deadline has been set. Just more so to prevent any misuse of time, any misuse of budget. And and we'll kind of work efficiently in that manner. So we'll set checkpoints of when there'll be decisions made. And of course, there's often time where there'll be a decision or a part that's being changed later on in the process, almost close to being, where the product is being printed on the package. And at that stage, it's as simple as going back into, SolidWorks, updating the model and importing it back into the file, and re-rendering. And we have all the assets set up. We know, what our materials are going to be. Everything's already set up. So it's as quick as saving that out or rendering that out, putting it into our Photoshop file, and just kind of going through that breakdown process again, replacing the TIFF file prior to it going into the Illustrator file, and then just knocking it out. So as long as we know that there is no changes past a certain point, then we're happy to press on. But if it's going to continually be updating, it's all about optimizing your workflow so that you can accommodate for those updates.
Awesome. And then someone's asking how you guys kind of do the animated exploded views in 360. Do you guys any kind of do it where it's sort of the animated spinning 360 exploded view? It looks like you definitely had some kind of stills of exploded view. Not sure if you had any kind of videos showing that.
We tried to push to get a video of it, because we like anything, we thought it'd be wicked. But we played around with it internally. But the process that we'll do for that is we will, if it's going to be something that's going to be really cool like that, we'll try and we'll take that out as a video itself, and we'll render that out as 4K, like I said before, and try to put as many frames in it as possible, and then we'll transition that into Photoshop to get a good GIF of it going at a very high resolution. Those files end up being, super large, but for something like that where it's going to be showcased on quite a large screen, these things are kind of worth that efficient process to make sure that there's no loss in quality, loss in resolution. And that being said, we did a lot of these images that you see today on 2060 or 2080 RTX 2060 cards. Now that we're starting to up, the game is always getting upped, and now we're kind of dealing with even larger files, larger bandwidth, larger rigs that we've got. The fact that now if we plug in these things into an RTX A6000, we're now starting to open doors and push boundaries on the capabilities of what we can achieve in such a short period of time. Render time is always going to be the devil's advocate when it comes down to this, and that's kind of why I pushed on earlier on the emphasis on execution being so big. If you want to do something, that's all well and good, but if you don't have the horsepower, unfortunately, to be able to execute it on a whim's notice, something could turn from 2 days to a week's long rendering out if the file gets corrupt overnight, or some issue happens where your internet access gets blown or something, something unforeseen. It really can set you back. So being able to reinforce what you want to do and being able to actually deliver it gets a lot easier when you have the right equipment.
Awesome. And so one thing, you actually don't have it active here, but in the lower frame there, you see the KeyShot XR product down there next to animation, and that allows people very easily to create someone sort of describing as PDF 3D, but basically the ability to really output super high res rotatable 360 product views. So that's a great way, and I'll kind of put that link in there for people who want to check on that. A couple different questions around color and kind of color management. How do you handle that for print in terms of getting CMYK output from KeyShot over into the print side of things, making sure that that is consistent?
So we typically output in RGB from KeyShot, because especially early stage, we'll make sure that kind of everything is aligned, and it's in Photoshop where we'll try and correct it. Because when we have our screens and kind of transitioning from RGB to CMYK, we're trying not to live outside of the spectrum of, creating crazy colors like fluorescence and stuff like that. So we're not going to lose, there's not going to be a lot of discoloration or a lot of color loss between these two. So we'll often make sure that we start off with the product as is, getting that tech pack, making sure that if it's a Pantone 426C or a Pantone 200C, that we start with that. We start with the baseline. We make sure it's the color on paper. And then, like I kind of talked about a little bit earlier on, was that these are marketing assets. So we want it to look as good as that vibrant red would look. If you're on, a showroom floor and you see this beautiful, Lamborghini or a Porsche, and it's going to have these perfectly precise lights that are at a perfect hue to make sure that it really pops the paint color. Similar thing happens with when we're going through these products, is we want the product to look as good as it would look in a showroom. So being able to emphasize that in KeyShot is part of the deal with those live edits, making sure that the client is really happy with it. A lot of time now we'll do this on screen, but prior to this, we would have done this in person to make sure, our screens are always calibrated to make sure that we get the color as accurate as possible on our end. And that can kind of get lost a little bit when you're trying to live edit with clients, or you're trying to send them something that they open up. So a lot of the time when it comes to those test prints, particularly when you're viewing it on a screen that's different than someone else's screen, there can be a real disconnect there between what they're viewing and what you're viewing. So what we try to do is we try to get those prints sent out to them to make sure that standard that you're setting, you're both viewing the exact same thing, no issues, unless that person happens to be colorblind. And then you're kind of at a loss. But prior to that, we try to make sure that whatever we're looking at, our client's looking at the exact same thing. And I think that's the best way to ensure that you're getting the color correction correct, without any of these issues of looking at an online overview print in Illustrator versus what they're looking at in Illustrator.
Awesome. A couple of questions regarding kind of your farm usage. Do you guys have an internal farm that you use? Is it GPU and CPU, or is it one or the other?
We don't. Our workflow, we've tried to kind of steer away from that, more so from a reliability standpoint. We're now finding ourselves starting to borrow GPU from KeyShot for some larger projects. A lot of projects we did for Seagate, we found ourselves needing to kind of eat into a couple of those cores. So we've kind of started kind of leaning towards that way. Now, us having it internally hasn't been something it's something we've discussed, but we've always tried to stay ahead of the curve and always update our rigs to make sure that, we don't need to rely on internal farms, and that our workflows are efficient enough that if we're doing a large scale animation, for example, that we have, maybe I think it's somewhere close now in the region of 6 computers with 3080 RTX 3080s from NVIDIA. So we're making sure that we can split up those frames, and we'll set those off. Our workflow is built around weekends when it comes to animations, so that we can set off maybe on 2 or 3 computers, 250, 300 frames per computer over a weekend. Really try to maximize what we have to increase, the capabilities of our rigs. As time goes on, if these animations start getting bigger, whether that's the investment into more RTX A6000s or into a farm or borrowing more cores, those conversations start opening up a little bit more.
Yeah, and so a couple people are asking. So the answer is you can have within our network rendering, you could have a mixed network. So you can have GPUs and CPUs on the same network render, which people are asking kind of on a Mac how to get NVIDIA GPU. That's how most people do it, which is they basically would set up a Windows box with some NVIDIA GPUs and then use network rendering to then send that from the Mac over to the Windows box for that GPU rendering. And of course, you're going to should generally get consistent results across that sending between the various types. So a couple other questions. I believe, were you discussing Python scripting at one point?
I was.
Yeah. So people have some questions about kind of that, like what do you guys script generally, and kind of, how easy is that to use for you?
Well, we very thankfully we have an internal genius by the name of Michael Hull, who is our Python scripting genius, and he's our kind of go-to. And what we've been able to utilize from the Python scripting is, I'll tell you an example now for K&N, dealing with an inventory re-render list of close to, I think, 350 to 400 products. And importing those all, making sure that we can batch render all these, particularly making sure that we get the visual brand language consistent. And I know I discussed a little bit of it with the on-package graphics, making sure shadows were all the same, making sure materials were consistent. the same thing applied with this, where we were able to configure a Python scripting for not only importing files into one master scene and setting up each individual skewed scene in KeyShot. I'm trying to verbally see if I can word this right. But we had then a KeyShot file set up separately for each single individual CAD model, which was in the exact same orientation as one master file. So it had both the same composition in the frame, the same materials, the same lighting, and the same shadowing, and the same scaling. So we were able to do that with hundreds of the same CAD model, and just by the click of a switch and selecting all the CAD models that we needed, we were able to generate then new, fresh KeyShot files for each of these products, and then do a small, quick render of each one to make sure then that we could check it off on our list to make sure that the files were all set up correctly, that the product is in the right orientation, and that the materials are applied, and that the lighting is correct.
If you go up to the top next to the light manager and kind of right mouse click on there, you should be able to kind of bring up the on the top ribbon all the way to the right. Yeah, keep going. Keep going where it's blank. And then right mouse click, and then bring up scripting console. It's kind of hidden because it's pretty, and then you click on that. For folks who are curious about Python scripting, there's some example scripts that are in there that are included in that console. So creating standard views, different things. So if you go to our manual, people are kind of asking how to get more information on this, and I'll post this in the Q&A. But our YouTube channel has a KeyShot Essentials series, which it's about 90 minutes of content, walking you all the way through kind of opening KeyShot, through the basics of using it. Our YouTube channel, we put out quick tips and tutorials every week to kind of go through the more feature-based items. And then our manual as well, if you're kind of curious about things like Python scripting, in our manual, there's more details there about how to access some of these things and learn them. So we have a ton of learning content that is out there if you kind of follow our social media or go to our YouTube page. We could bring one person's asking a question. What's your trick for properly applying and rendering white plastic? I know it's always kind of a tricky kind of white on white situation. Do you have any sort of things that you've learned that you can share with folks?
Definitely tricky. It's never fun. One thing I do suggest is making sure that, first of all, you can, kind of play with it in regards to the lighting. That's always going to be a huge one, but play with it with your texture. If it's going to be shiny, you're going to lose a lot of that contrast on those corners to the lighting. But always put in, which I tend to use as kind of like a little cheat trick, is when you're coming in to put in a specific pin onto your product, make sure, say, let's put it on this corner. It's not going to work now because I have this behind it, but if you have it on a white background, I tend to make this color black. And I tend to put this into an alpha, or not an alpha, sorry, a screen, and create this larger piece. And what it should not do on alpha. I want to make sure that I put it behind the corners of my product to be able to really, come on, guy. Of course, it won't work for me now. Which I guess I'll follow up with after. But what I tend to do is
demos. No worries.
Yeah, it's the little ones. But what I'll do with that is I'll stick it behind the product, and what it's going to do is it's going to kind of act as a black screen to hide some of those, to stop some of that light getting in, so that it can really kind of gray out a little bit of those edges of your product. And that way, it's going to accentuate those corners. So even if your product is a great, vibrant white, you want it to stay that way. You don't want to dull it. You don't want it to come off lesser than. So really keep with that nice vibrancy that you have. And if you find yourself losing the edge, really play in with those screens and try to block out some of those lights coming around from the side and corners of your product. And it's going to help really, really tie it all in there cleanly and tightly together.
Awesome. If you can bring back up that slide you had showing the NVIDIA, the A6000, and kind of the performance that you were getting and the unboxing. Folks were asking about the card again. I just want to bring that up as we kind of get to the top of the hour. So it looks like we're almost here at the end of our webinar. So thank you everyone for joining. Again, if you want to learn more, our YouTube channel has a ton of great videos. We actually had our virtual render world last year that went through a lot of really deep customer stories. So if you kind of want information on KeyShot from a feature-based standpoint, we have that. We're also going to continue to kind of bring you great customer stories, such as Sprout here today, to talk about not just the feature set, but how they use it in production. And so, yeah, for the folks who are asking, you can kind of see here, the incredible performance increases that we're getting from version to version here with both KeyShot and with these newer NVIDIA GPUs. So yeah, I think that kind of covers it for the questions that we have from the audience. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Any parting words for us, Jack?
Just guys, all I can emphasize is those 3 pillars. If you're looking to increase some either of your workflow or of your quality of work, stick to those three pillars. And honestly, I don't think you can go too far wrong. Please keep an eye out on our Instagram. We're going to be pumping a ton of really exciting stuff, particularly over the next 2 weeks, with the use of the NVIDIA RTX A6000, and a lot of this stuff that I'm sure you're going to see through KeyShot too. I'm excited to show you guys, and I'm excited for you guys to see it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for the folks at Sprout. That's sprout.cc if you want to check out all the things that they do at their design studio. Really appreciate them coming today and joining us. And with that, we will leave you. Thank you everyone for coming today. And thank you, Jack.
Thank you very much for having us.